Hey guys, and welcome back to the latest video. This is actually a pretty late upload for me, given that I usually have work tomorrow, but given that it's Thanksgiving, I don't. And so as a result, I can finally do the chapter leaks. And given that it's almost 3 in the morning right now, I am a little quiet, so I apologize for that in advance. But finally, I saw on Twitter the leaks came out, and I've always wanted to cover the leaks as soon as they come out, and here we are, guys. So without further ado, let's hop right into chapter 335, titled Fertilized Egg. Pretty weird chapter name, to be honest, but I guess we can work with it. So the chapter begins with All Might explaining that based on the analysis performed by the Jets, they have discovered that the new order became some kind of poison in Shigaraki's body and that it has destroyed an unknown number of quirks. The students believe that this is their chance to win, since the civilians have been evacuated and all the heroes could go on the attack. However, All Might says that it is difficult to predict All for One's movements and that it would be difficult to avoid a large-scale confrontation. This is pretty accurate, especially given that All for One is one who can pretty much anticipate anything that's going to be thrown at him, so despite it seeming like an opening to win, I don't think they should get ahead of themselves, as All Might says. All Might starts naming the enemies: Shigaraki, All for One, Dabi, Toga, Six, Near High, and Nomu, and the remaining members of the Paranormal Liberation Front and all of the other prison breakers that are still out there. The heroes, on the other hand, have lost almost half of their own, so the students will have to train as much as possible. I am absolutely here for this, and it's really interesting to kind of think about retrospectively that now Dabi is mentioned along the names of Shigaraki and All for One. We've always known Dabi is super strong, but now that he's kind of revealed his hand, we all know that Dabi is probably the third strongest person within the League of Villains. Toga, her potential is kind of limitless, to be honest, given her quirk, but we also haven't seen her for quite a while. Bakugo shouts, saying that they have been preparing for a long time. They've been training with the Pussycat since the end of the war, and All Might just didn't notice because he went to follow Deku whenever he left the hospital. Midoriya asks if they will help him unleash the full power of One for All, but Bakugo obviously yells at him. He says that he was wanting to test the strength of his new technique, Cluster, and that Deku will be a good warm-up before the fight against Shigaraki and All for One. Then all of the students start talking about their techniques and what they want to do to train them. I'm glad to see that Bakugo, despite apologizing all those chapters ago, is still Bakugo at the end of the day, and something I really emphasized throughout Bakugo's transition into being more apologetic and really trying to atone for his quote-unquote sins against Midoriya is that despite him saying that he'll help Midoriya along the way in whichever way he can, Bakugo, as clearly mentioned here, has not stopped pursuing the spot of being the #1 hero, in fact saying he's going to be fighting Shigaraki and All for One himself. So I'm a big Bakugo fan, so this is absolutely perfect for me to see. All Might remembers their first training at UA and says that those little eggs have hatched long ago. I guess that's why the title was The Fertilized Eggs. They braved the storm and became birds that will now cross the skies. He then thinks to himself, Class 1A is strong, All for One. The scene cuts to the villain's lair where Shigaraki is roaring in pain. All for One calls him another me and asks him to calm down, saying that the quirk factor is damaged and that they just have to wait for him to stabilize. Toga is also with them. Great to see, finally. Shigaraki says that he hates Star, he hates all of this, he wants to end it all. As long as a single person remembers All Might's face, that hatred will not cease. All for One is smiling as he thinks to himself that because of the fusion of consciousness, he can feel Tomura's rage. All for One pats him on the head and says he did a good job, even if he didn't steal New Order. He got the biggest wall out of the way. Once again, this is kind of a testament and ode to the fact that Star and Stripe was truly one of the biggest obstacles in the entire way of Shigaraki and All for One's plan. She was absolutely super powerful, and despite him not having the quirk of New Order, nonetheless, they no longer have to face her himself, because clearly Star was able to almost destroy Shigaraki and All for One if she was just a little bit greedier and was willing to sacrifice those she cared about. I think she could have won that fight. Obviously now Shigaraki is clearly recovering, but what's kind of notable is I thought, given that the transition between their consciousness within these past few chapters, it was kind of swaying back and forth between Tomura, Shigaraki, and All for One. Clearly we can see that Shigaraki has merely grown in hatred and has kind of been pushed to the wayside in regards to him struggling with the fact that is he All for One, is he Shigaraki? Rather, he's just the embodiment of rage and wanting to destroy any remnants of All Might. And guess what, guys? The one who resembles All Might the most in their current state is in fact Midoriya, and I guess obviously Toshinori himself, but clearly he's a shadow of his former self in quite a literal sense. All for One says that although the preparations are ready, he wants to wait a little longer. Dabi is impatient and he can't stand the thought that his father is alive and well and doing his job. All for One tells him that although they have similar personalities, there is a big difference between the two of them. All for One likes to plan multiple routes to reach a single goal. He has spent decades creating new routes to cross the finish line. Once again, we see the brilliance of All for One fully explained by Horikoshi, that he is methodical in his approach, and although both of them are full of rage, full of disdain, and full of the desire for annihilation of all things, Dabi's willing to rush into it. All for One isn't. He isn't taking any chances, especially after almost being beaten by All Might for all of these years. He says that although Midoriya has returned to the well-secured UA, what will guarantee the villain's victory is the crucial difference between All for One and Toya. And All for One says, I have many friends. And as he says this, we see a light and Shigaraki's eyes seem to be drawn to it. The camera transits a long distance until it stops at UA, where we see a silhouette of Hagakure. And the chapter ends here. Finally, after all this time, the traitor is actually confirmed. Obviously, what he meant when he said he had many friends was not just that he had many friends who were villains, but that he has the traitor working directly for him, and that being Hagakure. Given that Hagakure's ability is invisibility, it does make sense that she would be the traitor, although I really was a big fan of the Nezu being a traitor theory. But one thing that I read actually pretty recently, if you remember whenever Deku went to the mall where he encountered Shigaraki, the one who directly suggested that to happen was Hagakure herself. So although that small tidbit of information could just be merely coincidental, clearly we can extrapolate. Given that we now know she is the traitor, we can definitely patch it together retroactively and say, yeah, Hagakure did bring Deku to the mall specifically for Shigaraki to encounter him. So this is pretty big news. I know the My Hero community has been debating for absolute ages regarding who in the hell the traitor was. It went from Present Mike to Ayoma, Haminari, and the list went on, and Hagakure was one of the ones mentioned. And props to whoever predicted this, because I was not on board with that. This chapter is a pretty huge chapter because despite Deku being safe within the walls of UA, clearly All for One and the rest of them know exactly how to get to Deku, especially with the traitor on their side, who, by the way, none of us can actually see. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this chapter as much as I did, and if you enjoy this type of content, please consider dropping a like if you haven't already and subscribing as well. I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving if y'all are celebrating, and hopefully with your family, but if not, just have a good rest of the kick-ass day. As always, my friends, be greedier, and I will catch you all next time.